Actually, it's important to know because Rome was a dictatorship, and the dictators were infamously cruel and degenerate and perverted, like Tiberius and Caligula. Maybe you've heard some of those names, Nero, Claudius. And they persecuted the church. And during the 2nd century, the historians talk about the 5 good emperors. But they were good for the Roman Empire, maybe, but they also persecuted the church. And the New Testament was written during that 1st century time of church persecution in the Roman Empire. They lived in Israel, but Israel was occupied by the Roman Empire. When they traveled around in Acts, mainly they were going to countries that were occupied by the Roman Empire. So God really used it in unexpected ways. So during the 2nd century, again, as I said, 5 good emperors, but they also persecuted the church. Good for the empire, rough on the church. The 3rd century, they got a break for about 50 years of very little persecution. But then it started ramping up again until Diocletian came to power, another emperor, around 293 to, he started a persecution from 293 around 312, where he actually vigorously tried to completely destroy Christianity and the church, to just eliminate it from the empire. Well, this is very interesting because in 313, after he was done, 313, they had a Roman civil war. And one of the generals involved in that, Constantine, had a vision at night, conquer by this. I don't believe he was a Christian, but he said, conquer by this. He saw a cross. And the next day he conquered, he won the civil war, and he declared, apparently because of that vision, the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity in the empire, just like that. So somebody tries to destroy the church all the way up to 312, and then in 313, it's legal. Just like that. Not only that, in 380, it became the official religion of the empire. Can you imagine going from trying to completely destroy it to the official religion of the empire? What happened? How could that happen? You know, the Christians did not win any elections. There were none. They didn't win any elections. They didn't win any court battles. They didn't win any military battles. But what they did do is they won many, many hearts and minds. So many, in fact, that the professor, Rodney Stark, estimates that during that 4th century, over 50% of the empire were Christian. The Apostle Paul wrote during the time of Nero, he wrote this verse, 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 3. Nero would be persecuting and executing many Christians, soon to include Paul and Peter, the guy writing this verse. Peter, he crucified upside down. Paul was beheaded. That was pretty merciful. Some of the other ones, he put on stakes and lit them on fire to light his gardens. Others he sewed into skins and then let wild animals loose on them. So very difficult persecution. And Paul, in the middle of all this, writes these words. He says, I urge you, first of all, to pray for all people. Ask God to help them, intercede on their behalf, and give thanks for them. And pray this way for kings like Nero and all those who are in authority, so that we can live peaceful, quiet lives marked by godliness and dignity. This is good. It pleases God, our Savior, who wants everyone to be saved and to understand the truth. And the book of Acts shows us the power of this prayer. This prayer is what Paul told all the churches to be praying. It shows us the power of their living and their ministering, both inside the church and outside the church. And history confirms it. They transformed the entire Roman Empire. And even today, all generations, I believe, in all churches in all countries can be encouraged by this example. Now, these people were very countercultural in the Roman Empire. The Christians they stood out. That's one of the reasons why they were so persecuted. They took some unpopular stands. They had very good character, good marriages. When marriage was almost non-existent, and I mean they had them, but they were just serial hookups everywhere. They had good marriages, good families. They refused to give their daughters in marriage as children, which was the custom then. They wouldn't do it. Now, abortion wasn't that common in Rome because it was so dangerous. But what they would do is if they had unwanted babies, and especially this happened to many little girls, because they prized the boys, they would just put them in a field or in a forest, exposed to the elements or some animal that came along. Well, the Christians couldn't protest like, we can do today, and I think is something we should do. But what they did do was they would go and rescue those babies. They'd go and look for them and rescue them and raise them up. And Christians were known for their love for each other. They were known for their love for prisoners, for the poor, for the sick. They would have these huge epidemics that might wipe out a town and everyone would run for their lives. Christians were known for staying behind and nursing the sick, not being fearful. They were known for that. They were also known, the Christian martyrs, they were known for the supernatural, for being able to bring supernatural healing and especially deliverance from demons, which were common in that culture. And they were also well known for their Christian martyrs, the way they died. Those martyrs would die before crowds in the Colosseums, and the way they died just had a huge impression on not only the church, but on the Roman Empire, the people that were watching this. And so once the persecutions ended, the irony is that the church became more fashionable, maybe even advantageous. And so once the persecutions actually kept the churches strong. Because if you weren't serious, you're not going to be in church. You're not going to be there. The only people that would be there would be people willing to risk their lives for the Lord. That's all that was in church. Well, once that persecution stopped, they started filling up with lukewarm people that were just there to make business contacts, whatever, or popularity. And the church started getting worldly and political, centuries after century. And then we get to where the Catholic Church hit a low nadir of being political and worldly. And then we had Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation to bring the Bible back into the believers, which the believers weren't allowed to even interpret the Bible or read it. They brought the Bible back to the believers and the churches. And that Reformation was a huge revival. I mean, it went for a long time and over large parts of Europe. It influenced Europe. It also influenced American government. And that's part of what we call the Judeo-Christian heritage that we have in our country that we had. And you can see it if you read, you can see it in the foundational political ideas that we have in our country. You can see it even in the documents, talk about God and the Bible. And even the buildings, you can see sometimes they'll be dedicated to Jesus or God, some verse written on them. So you can see this Judeo-Christian heritage that our country started with. Even on the Supreme Court, there's Christian writings. Well, Romans 13:1, the Apostle Paul wrote this also while Nero was the emperor. He said, everyone must submit to governing authorities. Now listen to this shocking statement. There are so many in Christianity. When these shocking statements come, we really need to meditate on them, or you can get a totally bad idea off them, or you can get incredible inspiration off of them. Here's one of them. Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God. Nero comes from God. There's something to ponder. They're God's servants, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong. Now, we're going to see a theme here. Christianity is more powerful than the world. It's more powerful than the world authorities. If we didn't, God doesn't force anybody to love him, right? God doesn't force anyone to obey him. God doesn't force anyone to obey the laws. But in his great mercy, he gave us a desire and an ability to install government, to impose order. Otherwise, we would all be like in a Mad Max movie down here, everyone going crazy for themselves. And so there's been a lot of different governments on earth, a lot of different forms of governments on earth, some better than others, some good, some bad. It's interesting, in Jeremiah 29:7, the Jewish exiles got exiled to a bad government, Babylon. It was a bad government. And in Jeremiah 29:7, the Lord told them, be sure and pray for this country, because your welfare depends on its welfare. And in the same way, better pray for America, better pray for your country. This goes for everybody in whatever country they're in, because your welfare is affected by the welfare of the country. That's right. I would extend that in a democracy. Better pray, better care, better share, better serve, better vote, better speak up, or you'll suffer. So We know that we have a democracy with a constitution and amendments like the First Amendment, which guarantees us freedoms that we probably take for granted that other people don't have, they would love to have, like freedom of speech. You know, we have freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of the press, freedom of petition, and other freedoms. And, you know, and I get that in the past, not everybody has experienced those freedoms, and maybe now not everybody's experiencing those freedoms. But we need to know what they are, and we need to defend them. And we also need to defend them for some people maybe who can't defend them for themselves. And it's interesting, in the book of Acts, even the Apostle Paul, on a couple of occasions, defended his rights as a Roman citizen. He said, hey, you can't tie me up like this and just throw me in prison or beat me. I'm a Roman citizen. What? You know, and people backed off. He did it in Acts 16, Acts 22. And partly they say why he did it was to draw the line to protect the church. You can't just do whatever you want with these people. You know, because in Rome they did have they had a law, they had some rights. Now, freedom of religion is not just freedom to go to church. It's freedom to be a Christian outside the church too, right? You know, freedom of religion, it includes freedom to have your own doctrine. The government doesn't tell you what doctrine you have to have, or what polity, how you organize your church, or who you can discipline and how. The government's not supposed to get involved in that. Or who you pick for staff, who you pick for employees. Those are all freedoms that we have been given, that the government's not supposed to be involved in. One time, I wrote a letter to the school board asking, this was before JPL, but I was asking to rent a school auditorium for a church service. So they sent me a letter back. Sorry, we don't rent to religious organizations. I was like, I come from Orange County. It's like, man, we went through those wars a long time ago. I thought maybe nobody's ever tried to rent out here. So I sent him a letter back. Hey, I don't know if you're up with current law, and here's a couple of case laws, you know, San Diego, Orange County. So I get a letter back. Okay, here's your rent. You can rent it. So they just didn't know. You know, nobody had asked them in a long time. They hadn't thought about it in a long time. But if I had not stood up, I wouldn't have got the rental. So we need to be able to do that. Students, you know, even though the principal or teachers may think otherwise, students are allowed to bring their Bible to school. They can read their Bible in school. They can pray in school. They can share their faith in school. If there's a classroom discussion and they want to share a religious idea that goes with the discussion, they can share that religious idea. But not everybody knows that. So we have to know that and then make sure that we stand up for that. Even now, I just heard about this last week, the California legislator is passing a bill, it's a resolution actually called ACR 99, which is dictating sexual morality and values specifically to religious churches and organizations, saying that this is what you're supposed to think about this subject and not that that's harmful. Well, you know, apart from whether you agree with what they're saying or whether there's good information or misinformation in it, apart from all that, it's a great violation of the First Amendment. So we need to stand and be aware and do whatever we can to oppose things like that in truth and love. And that's why it's so critical for Christians in a democracy. We've got to vote. We need to make that sacrifice. It is a sacrifice. I hate voting. You know, it's a lot of work and stuff, but I always want to do it. I thought we need to do that. We need to vote, or else we're going to be represented by people who we maybe are not even in agreement with. Now, Ephesians 1:22 says, God has put all things under the authority of Christ. So even though he's instituted authorities on the earth, there's a higher one, the highest one. God has put all things under the authority of Christ. He's made him head over all things for the benefit of the church. All right? Head over everything for the benefit of the church. And the church is his body. It's made full and complete by Christ who fills all things everywhere. The problem we have really, honestly, we were talking about identity. We don't know our identity. We don't know our authority. And so we just take things. Or we just go with the flow when we could change things if we knew our identity, if we knew our authority, if we knew our power, if we knew how it works, right? So Anyhow, in Hebrews 13:7, it says, 17, obey your spiritual leaders and do what they say. That's a nice verse. I really like that one. I think I'm going to make it my life verse. No. Obviously, that verse can be interpreted in very good or bad ways. It says their work is to watch over your souls, and they're accountable to God. Yeah. Now, what I will say is that we need to be careful whose authority we put ourselves under in a church. If you're not even in a church, you're not even under spiritual authority, really, because God delegates it. So we need to find the right authority, and not just, if you get under the wrong authority and then you have to rebel against it, it's like you're in a rock and a hard spot. So just get in the right authority in the first place, and you can go with the flow. And the interesting thing is, and I've learned a lot about spiritual authority the bad way, the hard way, growing up in the 60s and 70s, the rebels against authority. But our own spiritual authority increases or decreases according to how our relationship with spiritual authorities in our life, with the right ones that God gives us. It affects our own spiritual authority in life. Now, Jesus called us to represent him in every single area of society and life. Represent him in everything we do or say. That goes for politics, business, media, arts and entertainment. It goes for at school, at home, in church. I talked to a guy came up for me for prayer while I was in Tijuana. He said, I want to serve the Lord more. And they were coming up for prophetic words. And I says, well, what are you doing for the Lord now? Translator, blah, 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 blah. Comes back to me. I said, well, he said, I'm the church treasurer. I says, what do you do for your work? Oh, I own a refrigeration business. And the word started coming to me. I says, I think you're very excellent in what you do. His son actually was my translator, and he told me in English, yeah, he's really good at it. And I said, the Lord wants you to use your business to serve him. And it just started flowing many different ways that the Lord could use him in his business to do the Lord's work in his business. I said, people in your business, they aren't here in church, they're in your business. You are God's anointed one, God's pastor, to minister to these people in all many different ways. And he just started lighting up. And I says, you know what? You have so much work to do for the Lord. You're going to say, hey, I have too much to do. I says, you don't lack for work for the Lord. He was just lacking a little vision. And that's the way for all of us. Our anointing, we're just as anointed as people in a church. The fivefold works inside the church and outside the church. It works in all of these areas, just as strong as anointing. But it doesn't work if you don't know it, if you don't know your identity, you don't know your authority, you don't know your power. So all you do is you go to work and you do the work. You don't realize there's the work and there's God's work. And God's work really spices up the work. When you put them both together, it gets really nice. You get some purpose in your life. Like my sister says, oh, that's so exciting. I can't wait to go to work on Monday. She's doing the same kind of desk jobs, but people come to her, and she's ministering to them. And because she does her work excellent, people will listen to her. Pause. Have you ever had a person in your workplace who wants to talk about the Lord who does horrible work? That's no bueno. That's not good. It doesn't work at all. We have to start with excellent work. So anyway, Jesus calls us to represent him in all this. I had an interesting experience with this, not as a profession, but as a volunteer. I like to share every time I talk about this subject. So I'm serving in my boys' school, just to be a servant, just to have a relationship. Maybe if something comes up, I can talk about it because I'm serving them. And so I'm in that PTA doing the finances, which I hate, but I'm doing it. And they asked me to run for an office on a local committee, which I didn't really want to do, but they asked me. So, okay, I'll serve, I'll do it. So I ran and I lost. Then I thought, now I want to win, now that I lost, But the guy who won resigned right after he won. I thought, great. Now they asked me to take his place. It's like, okay, so he gets all the glory and I got to do all the work. He wins the election and now he sends me on the committee. It's like, so I'm on the committee for 1 or 2 weeks. They asked me to represent them at the district level. So I go to the district level. They said, hey, we need people to run for offices. Will you run for vice president? I says, I don't even know what this board does yet. I don't even know what this thing is. I'm just trying to serve. Well, that doesn't matter. We don't care. We just want you to run. Okay, if I can help. I get elected on that platform that I don't really know what I'm doing, but if I can help. And then to top it off, the boys go to another school and I have to resign, just like the guy in the committee. I'm like, Lord, what was that all about? I mean, I'm starting to get cranked up. Ooh, you know what's going to happen. And I felt the Lord was saying, I just wanted to show you how easily I can promote all of my people if they will just step up and serve. Just step up and serve. I can take them anywhere I want them to go. That's a good word right there. We're ready to go home right now. If only he would stop. 2 Corinthians 3:17. It says, for the Lord is a spirit, and wherever the spirit is, there's freedom. Is the spirit in your life? If it is, there'll be freedom. If we don't feel freedom, it's like, I need a little more of that spirit here. Because when we're truly filled with the Spirit, it's like when the disciples were getting persecuted and they were starting to get intimidated, and they said, hear their threats, O Lord, and give us, your servants, great boldness in preaching your word. They were filled with the Spirit, but they were feeling intimidation. They prayed for more, and they got more, and it said they spoke the word boldly. And so, you know, the sign that we're filled with the Holy Spirit, as much as we want to be, is freedom. That's a wonderful word. And it says, all of us who've had the veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like Him as we're changed into His glorious image. And so the thing that Jesus said, you know, we misunderstand freedom big time, at least from the point of view of the Lord. It's the Spirit who gives freedom. Didn't Jesus say, you'll know the truth, and what will set you free? Truth will set you free. Error will keep you in bondage. And that's the same with identity. What is identity? They tell, you get the truth about who you are, it sets you free. If you believe lies about who you are, or if you believe wrong, you're in bondage. And so that verse is written to every believer in every country. Not just the free countries, not just the democratic countries, in every country. It can apply to every believer. And Jesus said that the world can't give peace. Do you remember that verse? The world cannot give you peace, only I can. It's the same with freedom. The world cannot give us true freedom. It can give us, you know, a lot of nice things, but true freedom, you can be in the freest country in the world and just look at the people that commit suicide, the people that are depressed. I mean, they're free, but they're not free at all. Freedom true freedom comes from God. It comes from Jesus. And the freedom doesn't really come from just changing circumstances or changing countries. The freedom comes from changing your thinking and your desires and your attitudes and your actions, your expectations. And they get more and more aligned with Jesus, who's the freest being in the universe, and more in line with His will in our life, what He wants to happen. Do you think what He wants to happen on earth is going to happen? Do you think if you're in between that and Him, it's going to happen for you? And so there's freedom right there. Now, let me give you some examples of it. Revelations 2:10. It says, don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. Don't you love that verse? I didn't know I was going to suffer. Well, don't be afraid about what you're about to suffer. That's another way of also saying don't fear or worry about things that haven't even happened yet. And then he says, in Hebrews 2:15, only in this way could He set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. Now, if you are a persecuted Christian and you're not afraid about what they might make you suffer and you're not afraid about dying, come on. I mean, you're going to be gloriously free. You're going to be free to show the glory of God. You're going to be one of those honored martyrs we read about in the book of Revelations who have defeated Satan by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimonies, and they didn't love their life so much that they're afraid to lose their life. That will be you. I mean, that would be me if we have that. You can just feel the freedom in that. I mean, if you're not afraid of suffering and you're not afraid of dying, how can anybody intimidate you? What are they going to do? I mean, if you're in that state, you're in a state of being supernaturally bold and free in everything that you do. Wouldn't you agree? There's a form of freedom. Here's another one. 2 Corinthians 8, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. He says, they are being tested with many troubles, and they're very poor, but they're filled with abundant joy, and they're overflowing with rich generosity. You ever been worried about money, anybody, or trials? Things are going wrong in my life. Can you imagine if when trials came to you, it filled you with abundant joy, and when the money's tight, you're filled with rich generosity? I mean, I call that being free. If you're honestly that way, I'm not talking about white-knuckling it, okay, I'll give. I'm talking about, yeah, no problem, the Lord will, like they were. That's free. That's freedom. How about, there's Titus 2:14. It says, he gave his life to free us from every kind of sin, to cleanse us and to make us his own people, totally committed to doing good deeds. Now, before I was born again, I thought freedom was to quit going to church and start going to parties. I thought that's the way to be free in life. Sin, now I believe sin is like, I believe drugs and alcohol are a type of sin. And that is, it promises a lot, it delivers less, it takes more and more to get less and less. That's like sin. And maybe the parties don't get old, but hey, we get old. What, are you going to party when you're 110? We get old. They go away from us. So, I would rather be now, honestly, when I got born again, this shocked me. I didn't realize what was happening, but my desires got changed. My desires got supernaturally changed. Right now, I actually want to be free of every kind of sin. Before, when I thought about that, I thought, oh my God, I got to leave that sin. I need that sin. This is going to be such a boring life. Now I want that's the freedom that comes with the Lord. Now I want to get rid of the sin. Now my thing is, oh my gosh, I did that sin again. Oh, it's completely flipped. That's freedom. I would rather be joyful than rich. I'd rather, if you said you can be always joyful or you can be rich, which one will you pick? Easy. I would rather have peace in God's peace in trials than be peaceful in my worldly comfort zone, where I have an illusion that everything's going to be okay. I'd much rather have God's peace. That's what I would want. That's what I would want. No, I'm not just, God has put that desire in me. That's freedom. When we can have what we want is a form of freedom like that God does. I pray right now, pray, Lord, I pray that my greatest joy, your presence is going to be my greatest joy, and that doing your will be my greatest pleasure. Now, when that happens for me 100%, I'm going to be the freest man in this world. When my greatest joy is God's presence, it's like, come on. First, here's another example, powerful examples. 1 Corinthians 7:21, are you a slave? Don't let it worry you. But if you get a chance to be free, take it. And remember, if you were a slave when the Lord called you, now you're free in the Lord. And if you were free when the Lord called you, now you are a slave of God. But don't be enslaved by this world. It says God paid a heavy price for you, a high price for you, so don't be enslaved by this world. This flips that completely on its head. Masters can take away the freedom of a slave, and where they can't work where they want. They have to do what the master says. They can't, do anything when they want. But they cannot take away faith and obedience. A slave can choose to have faith and obedience in God, and there's nothing a master can do about that. There's really nothing a master can do about Jesus deciding to give us the true riches of heaven. And the true riches of heaven can include eternal purpose and contentment. It includes far more supernatural joy, peace, and love, and hope, and faith than those masters had. And so a lowly slave, if they want, they can choose to be a miraculous sign and wonder in this earth, where even the masters are like, holy smokes, who's this? That's the calling on every single person, including slaves. A lowly slave can be a great miraculous sign and wonder, ironically, because they're a slave and they're demonstrating this incredible supernatural power. Now, the Judeo-Christian heritage in America is fading today. right? You see a lot of craziness going on. Some is just like, are you guys crazy? Others is, this is wicked. All kinds of stuff going on. But this isn't the first time. In the 1740s, society was getting really bad. They had a great revival. And Benjamin Franklin was in Philadelphia when the revival swept over Philadelphia. And he commented, I can't even walk down a street in Philadelphia, and I'm hearing psalms being sung from every house on every street. It's like the whole world's gone religious. Benjamin Franklin said that. But the revival started fading. The churches started letting it fade away. And then the War of Independence didn't help matters until 1790, things were getting really bad again. Once again, the society was getting anti-Christian. Public drunkenness and immorality and crime was growing again. The church membership was decreasing. The vices increasing, church membership decreasing. Some denominations were talking about merging because we're not going to make it. We're shrinking. Some churches had no pastor or no new members for years. In the university, they founded that Princeton University was founded as a religious college. 1 year, they could only find 2 believers on the whole campus. And they had this club. I don't know what they did. I looked it up. I couldn't find it. It's called the Filthy Speech Movement. And every student was a part of that except 5. And they would run anti-Christian plays. They'd do mock communion. A couple times they had a Bible burning on that college campus. This is back in 1790. And on the frontiers, religious frontiers, they were very irreligious, very rough, lawless. And a Supreme Court justice named John Marshall, he predicted in 30 years, Christianity and churches will be gone out of America. And maybe that was true by what things looked like, but instead, revival struck. It exploded right in those irreligious, lawless frontier lands. That's where it started, out in the middle of nowhere, in the boondocks out there in Kentucky somewhere, and just exploded and swept across the earth. And for 50 years, these churches are getting filled with new converts, just flooding into the churches. Everyone getting revived and excited about the Lord. The Holy Spirit's purifying the churches, inspiring, empowering them. That's where we got all these reform movements like the abolition of slavery, the rights of women, the rights of prisoners, care for everybody, including the handicapped or the mentally ill. That's when they confronted alcoholism. Even though prohibition didn't work out so great in the end, they were trying to confront addiction, which we do today in our own way. That's what they're trying to do. And also, during that time, they started the world missions. That started as a part of that revival, which changed. That was new in those times, just starting out. And it changed not only our country, it changed the world. If I could, I don't have time, but if I could tell you the statistics around the world right now, with Christianity around the world, it is amazing what's going on. So 2 Timothy 1:7-8, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity. There's a good definition of bondage right there. Worry, fear, timidity, God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, not just an aggressive idiot, power, love, and self-discipline. And so never be ashamed to tell people about our Lord. That is freedom. That's also God's will right now. So freedom is, to me, freedom is the freedom to be everything that God created me to be. That's what my idea of freedom is. Now, if we compare ourselves to other people around us, we're going to still be enslaved to the same kind of things. What I see, we really need to lift up our eyes away from what's common, the average, what everyone's doing. We need to start looking at the Bible more, looking at these huge verses, looking at Jesus more. And so we can see how much we have that we can believe for. It's shocking. And get free.